there are secrets hidden in the pages of the Bible that few dare to uncover. Have you ever stopped to think about the gaps in the New Testament? How many texts, how many teachings from figures like Paul of Tarsus may never have reached us? What happened to those words that could have completely transformed our view of Christianity? What are the mysteries that even the greatest scholars avoid discussing? Today, we are going to embark on a different journey. We are going to open a portal to the past and explore what could have been the lost letters of Paul, texts that, for some reason, were never included in the sacred canon. Are you ready to know what they could reveal? Imagine for a moment Paul, the tireless apostle, traveling through the lands of the Mediterranean, writing letters to churches, individuals, entire communities. His words shaped the Christian thought that we know today. But what if not all of his letters have reached us? What if there were writings that never saw the light of day? What could these mysterious documents tell us about the early days of Christianity? About Paul's true vision of faith, humanity, and the future? Brace yourself. The revelations we're about to explore may change the way you view the Bible forever. Here, as a viewer, you are invited to think about what was lost and feel the thrill of mystery, preparing to delve deeper into hidden secrets. To understand the depth of this mystery, we need to go back to the scriptures. Some passages in the Bible itself already give us clues, but few dare to connect the dots. Let's start here. In 2 Timothy 4 verse 13, Paul mentions something curious. He writes, "When you come, bring with you the cloak that I left at Troas with Carpus, and the books, especially the parchments." Books and parchments. What were these texts that Paul valued so highly? And why aren't they in our hands today? And that brings us to the bigger story. Paul, the most influential apostle of the New Testament, was also the author of countless letters, more than have come down to us. He wrote to entire communities, guiding, correcting, and, above all, teaching. His mission was clear: to spread the message of Christ. But what if some of these letters contained teachings that could have changed the course of Christian history? First revelation, few people know, but there are historical and theological records that suggest that Paul may have written about subjects that were never fully accepted by the early church. Perhaps topics that were too sensitive, or even too advanced for the time. Some scholars believe that, in these lost letters, Paul may have spoken more deeply about the relationship between faith and the social tensions of the time, discussions that, for political or spiritual reasons, ended up being left out. Now think, what if, among these letters, there were teachings about the true nature of Christianity, letters that spoke directly about the struggle against occult powers that shape our reality to this day? What could Paul have written that was so disturbing or so controversial that the guardians of the canon decided to leave it out? These are the questions that, from now on, we will explore together. The tension is building. You begin to see that these lost letters may contain much more than simple guidance for the churches. They may contain secrets that, if revealed, would change everything. In the texts that have come down to us, Paul speaks a lot about faith, redemption, and salvation in Christ. But some scholars of ancient writings suggest that, in these lost letters, Paul may have addressed even deeper themes that directly touch the structures of the spiritual world. Perhaps he delved into the invisible struggle between heavenly and earthly forces, between light and darkness, in ways that have never reached our eyes. Imagine this, a letter from Paul, perhaps addressed to a community of persecuted Christians, in which he discusses invisible spiritual battles, warning about the evil forces that still act in the world. This Paul, a spiritual warrior, who speaks not only about moral behavior, but about the hidden nature of the universe. This revelation changes everything. Christianity as we know it may be just one piece of a larger puzzle, a much larger interplay of forces. Modern implications. Now think about the world today. The battles we see all around us, the chaos, the wars, the divisions. What if Paul had made it clear in his letters that these ancient spiritual forces are still at work? That evil is not just an abstract idea, but something that operates in our daily lives, in the shadows, shaping decisions, manipulating events, and even influencing governments and leaders. These letters may have touched on this very point. Perhaps Paul was warning that the real battle is not just in heaven or in the scriptures, But here, now, in the world we live in, what if these warnings had been included in the New Testament? How would our view of Christianity be different? The absence of these letters creates a void that we can only fill with questions. What else did Paul know? What did he see, feel, or know that was considered too dangerous to be known to all? Now the mystery deepens. What Paul revealed in his lost texts may have implications far beyond what we imagine, and connections to the modern world begin to emerge. But what if I told you that the true power of Paul, and perhaps his letters, has not been fully revealed? What most people don't know is that despite his fall, the evil that Paul warned about in his letters has not been destroyed. On the contrary, it persists. What Paul wanted to teach us went beyond salvation and redemption. He wanted us to be prepared for something much greater. Here comes the big twist. Paul, in his hidden writings, may have revealed that the power of darkness is not limited to temptation or sin, but is rooted in something much deeper, something that continues to manifest itself in subtle and powerful ways. Paul's followers, the early Christians, may have received direct messages about how these unseen forces operate, not just in the spiritual realm, but in the physical world we see and touch. You might be wondering, what could Paul possibly have written that would be so disturbing? Think about the forces that shape history. The wars that have devastated nations, the empires that have risen and fallen, the leaders who have made decisions that have changed the course of humanity. What Paul was warning us about is that evil, in its purest form, still has power. What's more, it may be more present in politics, culture, and even religious institutions than we realize. Exploring new perspectives, these writings may challenge the narrative we've always heard, that evil has been defeated. Paul may be telling us that the real battle is still going on, and that it's much closer than we think. The fall of evil wasn't the end of history, it was just the beginning of an ongoing war that plays out in the structures around us. Now think about the implications of this. If these letters had contained specific instructions on how to identify these forces, how to fight them, how would that have changed the history of Christianity? How would it have changed the way we live our faith today? Paul may have left clues that, if we had followed them, would have made us see the world through different eyes, eyes that see not only the visible, but also the invisible. Brace yourself, because this revelation only scratches the surface. What comes next will further challenge the truths we have been told. Now the narrative takes an unexpected turn, connecting the content of Paul's letters with the power that still works in the shadows. The questions begin to arise. What else is there that we don't see? Have you noticed passages like 1 Corinthians 2 verses 6 to 8, where Paul writes about wisdom among the mature, a wisdom that does not belong to the powers of this world? He mentions rulers of this age whose eyes have been blinded to the truth. Who are these rulers? And why does Paul speak as if they were controlling the course of events, but with an unseen agenda? It is verses like this that suggest that Paul knew more than could be said openly. He was warning about forces working in the shadows, and his lost letters may have brought even more direct revelations about these hidden powers. Second revelation. Now think about it. Some ancient traditions suggest that Paul spoke, in letters that have not come down to us, about the direct connection between fallen angels and events that shaped history. These once fallen angels have not disappeared. They continue to influence the world, through systems, empires, and even the very fabric of society. The fall of these angels was not just spiritual, it echoed through the fabric of the material world. This means that somewhere in these letters, Paul may have been talking about how these fallen powers still influence kings, leaders, and nations. What if Paul was showing us how these angels, rather than being destroyed, continue to influence modern events such as major wars, economic collapses, and even revolutions? These lesser-known verses in ancient texts suggest something disturbing. What we consider to be human choices or earthly conflicts may actually be influenced by forces operating beyond our sight. Paul, in all his wisdom, tried to warn us. But without these letters, what we are left with are fragments, distant echoes of a much greater truth. And now I ask you, if these fallen angels are still among us, if their actions directly influence our world, what was Paul really trying to tell us? Why were these revelations left out? Now the narrative deepens, showing that the mystery lies not only in the distant past, but in forces that still act upon us. The second revelation brings a new level of suspense. What if evil had never really gone away? Now that we have begun to understand the hidden forces mentioned by Paul, we need to place these revelations in the context of human history. Think of some of the most turbulent times that have marked our civilization: wars, revolutions, mass destruction. What if Paul was trying to show us that these events, apparently caused by human disputes, actually had an invisible hand behind them? History is full of inexplicable conflicts, where cruelty and devastation seem to surpass any reason or logic. And here is what many have missed. Paul may have spoken, in his lost letters, about how these fallen angels, these spiritual forces, directly influence the course of historical events. Historical context. Let's look, for example, at the Great Wars. Paul knew that the battles we fight on the physical plane are often a reflection of a much larger battle being fought on the spiritual plane. He may have written about how these fallen powers, ancient beings who have deep roots in our history, continued to manipulate leaders and nations, fueling hatred, greed, and a thirst for power. Imagine Paul warning the early churches about how these forces were infiltrating the spheres of power. He may have even mentioned that while we humans believe we are in control, in reality, evil is at work silently, guiding decisions and actions that transform the course of history. Personification. The evil Paul spoke of is not just an abstract force. It has a name, a form, and a clear purpose. Paul knew this, and he likely tried to show us that these fallen beings continue to work in the shadows, influencing every aspect of our daily lives, from small decisions to major global movements. When you look at history through this new lens, everything begins to make sense. Chaos, destruction, empires rising and falling, all of this could be a reflection of an invisible battle. Paul may have been trying to open our eyes to this reality, a reality that most people never realize. Now think, if these letters had been included in the New Testament, how would it have changed our view of history and evil? How would it have impacted the way we live our spirituality today? The narrative deepens even further, connecting the spiritual world with the historical world. Evil is now personified, something real, tangible, and with purposes that directly affect our existence. But this story does not stop with the history of humanity. Paul was not just concerned with nations or major world events. He was deeply interested in something much closer to home: you. Your life. A new layer of mystery. And this is where we enter a new layer of revelation. Imagine Paul writing not just about cosmic and spiritual battles, but about how these invisible forces also affect individual decisions. In one of his lost letters, he could have directly addressed the role of these beings in everyday, silent spiritual struggles we all face. Have you ever wondered why sometimes the simplest decisions seem to be shrouded in a cloud of confusion? Or why moments of greatest temptation seem to come when we are most vulnerable? Paul may have been writing about how these fallen angels, these forces he knew so well, interfere not only with leaders and global events, but with the minds and hearts of each of us. Paul may have wanted us to know that these spiritual battles are happening all the time, and that our daily decisions, our moral choices, are arenas where these forces are at play. This revelation adds a whole new layer to our understanding of good and evil. This is not just a conflict between nations or ideologies, but something much more intimate: the battle for each person's soul. Practical application. Now ask yourself, how do these unseen forces shape your life? How do they affect your choices, your doubts, your fears? And most importantly, what could Paul have taught us about how to resist these influences? The lost letters may have revealed powerful spiritual tools that Paul intended for us to use to protect ourselves from these evil influences that subtly operate in our daily lives. Paul, who knew so much about the power of faith and spiritual warfare, may have been making it clear that we are constantly at war, not just with visible sins, but with those forces that shape our emotions, our impulses, our paths. He may have been trying to warn us that every choice we make has an impact on the spiritual landscape. And now the question remains, how do these invisible forces shape not only the world around us, but also our daily lives? The narrative now delves into a personal level, showing how what Paul may have written in his lost letters directly affects the viewer. The mystery becomes intimate, personal, and full of practical implications. Now, To truly understand the impact of these invisible forces in Paul's lost letters, let's look at those who have experienced spiritual battles. Real stories of people who faced the unimaginable and came out the other side with a new understanding of their faith. Heartwarming examples. Consider the story of Mary, a woman who for years struggled silently with doubt and fear. She didn't know why her life seemed stuck in a cycle of hardship, where every decision seemed to lead to failure. Until one day, while reading Paul's letters, something inside her was awakened. She realized that she was not just fighting against circumstances in the physical world, but against spiritual forces that were influencing her choices, her view of herself, and even her faith. It was at that moment, as she turned to deep prayer in the search for spiritual answers, that Mary began to understand what Paul had always taught, that the most important battle was the one within herself. And as she recognized this, her life began to change. Now imagine if Mary had had access to Paul's lost letters. What if in those letters there were clear instructions on how to resist these spiritual influences, on how to fortify your soul against these subtle attacks? How many more lives could be transformed? Personal reflection. What about you? Have you ever stopped to think about the forces that shape your most challenging moments? Perhaps these lost letters were written just for people like you. For those who silently feel an internal struggle that seems to have no end. Paul may have left advice and guidance on how these forces work, how your choices are the battlefield, and how you can resist them even if you can't see them clearly. These stories of spiritual battle are more common than you might think. And the truth is that we are all in an ongoing struggle, sometimes without realizing it, against these invisible influences. What Paul wanted us to understand is that, like Mary, we too have the ability to resist, to overcome, and to find our way to the light. But without these lost letters, an important piece of the spiritual puzzle may be missing. Now, think about it. If Paul were here today, what would he say about the battles you're facing? Here, the narrative takes on an even more emotional and personal dimension. Real stories of spiritual battle directly connect the viewer to the theme, awakening a deep reflection on their own struggles and choices. We are approaching a crucial point in this journey. So far, we have talked about the invisible forces that shape the world, the spiritual battles we face without realizing it, and how Paul's lost letters could help us better understand this ongoing war. But now, we come to the most important part. Tension building. Over the centuries, many have sought answers. They have dug into ancient texts, asked difficult questions, and challenged the status quo of faith. Yet most have never been able to find all the pieces of the puzzle. And that is where you, right now, find yourself on the verge of discovering something few have dared to imagine. What we are about to reveal is not a battle that is being waged in some distant future, in a mystical place, or in the heights of heaven. The real battle is happening right now. All around you. Within you. And within your reach. Big revelation, the greatest revelation that Paul could have attempted to share, perhaps in the letters that have never come to our attention, is that the struggle between the forces of good and evil is not some distant epic story. It is woven into every detail of our daily existence. It is not a matter of waiting for the apocalypse or the final judgment. It is about realizing that the battlefield is here, right now. The enemy is not far away. He is present in every temptation, in every moment of doubt, in every act of desperation. Paul, with his clear vision and profound knowledge, may have been trying to prepare us for this. The real battle is happening now, all around you and within you. Spiritual forces, fallen angels, invisible influences, all of this is closer than we imagine. And perhaps Paul warned about it, in letters that have been denied to us. What does this mean? It means that the fight is not something external. Evil is not an enemy to be faced only at the end of time. It is at work now, in the choices we make, in the divisions that arise in our relationships, in the crises of faith we face. And if we are not aware, if we do not understand the depth of this fight, we run the risk of losing without even realizing we were in the battle. Now, the most important question: how will you face it? How will you prepare for this unseen battle that is already underway? Now the narrative reaches its climax. The grand revelation connects everything that has been discussed: the unseen forces, the lost letters, the spiritual battle, to the present moment, making the mystery personal and urgent. And now we have reached the end of this journey, but in some ways it is only the beginning. After all that we have discussed, the unseen forces, the letters of Paul that have never reached us, the spiritual battle that is taking place all around us, the question that remains is, what will you do with this knowledge? Paul, in his letters that we know, has given us several spiritual weapons to face these challenges. In Ephesians 6 verses 11 to 12, he speaks of the armor of God, exhorting believers to protect themselves against the schemes of the devil. He reminds us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. What Paul knew, and what he may have written in his lost letters, is that this spiritual armor is our only defense in an unseen war. But these words cannot remain on paper alone. What he asked of us is action. He instructed us to put on the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit. In his letters, both known and unknown, Paul wanted each of us to be prepared, not for some distant future, but for the daily battles we face now. Now it's your turn. Paul may have written about invisible forces, but he also believed in the visible power of action. And today, you have the choice to not only hear these words, but to act on them. How can you protect yourself from these forces? How can you strengthen your faith and resist the influences that shape your life in ways you don't even realize? Start with prayer, that tool Paul often spoke of as the most powerful. Pray for the wisdom to discern what is unseen and the discernment to resist evil. Read the scriptures with fresh eyes, looking not only for what is obvious, but for what is between the lines, in the lessons Paul left us. And above all, understand that this invisible battle is not yours to fight alone. Paul reminded us that we are part of a larger body, the body of Christ. We are all in this together. So help others see this truth, understand this battle, and prepare for it. Paul's message, both in the letters we know and those that have been lost, has always been clear. True victory is not in the future, but in the battles we win today. Here we come to the conclusion. The viewer now understands that the knowledge gained needs to be transformed into action, bringing the narrative to an inspiring and practical conclusion. If this journey has brought you new reflections, if it has awakened in you the desire to understand more about the invisible battles we face and how Paul's teachings can transform our lives today, then don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any future content, and together, we will continue exploring these hidden mysteries and strengthening our spiritual journey. Your support is essential for us to continue this mission. Let's go on this journey of discovery together.